Hello, hello, hello. Good to see you. You get fairy dust. I get fairy dust. Amelie gets fairy dust. And it's time for CPTSD, Pete Walker. We're on chapter 1 still, and we'll be for a while. I'm on page 8, and I wanted to talk about, so I wanted to talk about that those of us who have childhood trauma might not know that we have that because we've been diagnosed with something else, but maybe underlying that or just completely replacing it is childhood trauma is the problem. There's, I love this. I thought this was so great. There's a traumatologist, John Beere, something like that, B-R-I-E-R-E. He said that if CPTSD, childhood post-traumatic stress syndrome disorder, if it were given its due, so if it was, if everybody knew about it and what it produces and how it produces it and why, et cetera, this is what he says. If complex PTSD were ever given its due, the DSM, so that's the book that therapists get the diagnoses. That's the big thick book of all the mental disorders. The DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, used by all mental health professionals, would shrink from its dictionary size to the size of a thin pamphlet. I love this, and I agree with it. He says, in other words, the role of traumatized childhoods in most adult psychological disorders is enormous. He goes on to say, you know what, I think, I'll just give a quick for instance, but I hesitate to do so because it's a button pusher, so maybe I won't. Okay, I am going to. So I want to preface this, let's do a disclaimer, preface this with, I'm not saying ADHD is the cause is because you have childhood trauma. I'm not saying that. If you have ADHD and it's not related to CPTSD, I'm not talking about you. Then there's also ADD, attention deficit disorder, and again, I'm saying the same thing. If that's what you have and you have no childhood trauma, of course, those are actual diagnosable issues. However, one of the side effects from freeze trauma response, freeze mode, is ADD. Because why? We're not attending to what's in front of us. We're not attending to being present. We're somewhere else. Mentally, we're checked out, so we're not going to remember shit. So many times, I will even say, what was I saying? What was I saying? You may see me do it here. Also, why am I in this room? So if I just went to a therapist and said, I just keep going in rooms and don't know why I'm there, and I might get the diagnosis ADD, but actually my issue is I'm so checked out all the time that it's hard for me to pay attention. And so you see how that might be skewed. Again, if this isn't resonating with you, it's not for you. I promise. So then there's ADHD. And so flight mode people are always on the run, busy, next. And that can look a lot like ADHD. It looks like, because they're so moving so fast, they forgot that, and they're arriving late, and this and that. And so there's a lot of chaos. And so it looks like you're hyperactive when you're just fleeing because you're trying to save your life because you're having a trauma response. So again, take all my words with a grain of salt, read for yourself. but again, so that's just a clue. That's just a way in for us to think about, how has this impacted me? And what are it's just, that's why it's helpful. That's why I like going from a book, because instead of just talking about it willy-nilly, because it's just helpful to know this is grounded in, experience and research, et cetera, et cetera. So, again, and also you can have ADHD and you can have childhood trauma, and they could be separate. So don't stress about that too much. I'm just hoping that you get my point, is that the way that we act and the shit that we do is just maybe just the symptom of childhood trauma. Okay. So, that's also the case for addictions. I would not have said this 5 years ago, but now I truly believe, like, my food addiction is all about my childhood trauma, and a lot of the work that I do in the 12-step program has been, about delving that shit up and looking at it and questioning it and et cetera, et cetera. So addictions, if we just have an addiction, if we do not look at our childhood trauma stuff, our healing from that is we're not gonna get the full freedom if we don't have a gander at what the childhood trauma responses are, because that's what caused the alcohol in the first place. And remember, alcohol or food or gambling or sex or whatever, drugs, they're not the problem. The problem is the pain. And what is the pain? Childhood fucking trauma. Okay, good work. So just be curious about what you have, be curious about the things that you've been diagnosed with and the things that you do. Like, for instance, like, there's a lot of us that called ourselves just fucking lazy. We're just lazy asses. Well, no, bitch, like, we're having a freeze mode response. We're dissociative. Like, that's not our fault. And when you say someone's lazy, you're saying that is their fault, that they're making a choice to be lazy. And so it's very liberating, very healing to know that some of the stuff that we do that we don't like in our life, or that frustrates us in our life, is a result of this shit. So now I'm on page 10, and he says, he's starting to talk about the origins of CPTSD. And I just really liked that he kind of got it down to a word. Like, it's just a word. It's a very powerful and upsetting word. I'm going to read this. Many dysfunctional parents react contemptuously to a baby or toddler's plaintive call for connection and attachment. When we're babies and toddlers, we need that. Like, we need that so bad. And here's the word. Contempt is extremely traumatizing to a child. Contempt. And at best, extremely noxious in an adult, of course. Contempt is a toxic cocktail of verbal and emotional abuse, a deadly amalgam of denigration, rage, and disgust. Rage creates fear, disgust creates shame in the child in a way that soon teaches her to refrain from crying out, from ever asking for attention. Before long, the child gives up seeking any kind of help or connection at all. The child's bid for bonding and acceptance is thwarted, and she is left to suffer in the frightened despair of abandonment. And the way he's talking about this despair of abandonment is the players are there, that the parents are present, the people are present, and you're still abandoned. And it also means if you were actually abandoned. So, I really do scratch my head and think, I've spent so much of my life saying no, minimizing, I'm fine. I mean, I'm fine. You know, I have to throw it 50 times a day, but you know, I'm fine. And my childhood was fine. So many. But it turns out my childhood was actually pretty hard for me. And I'm extremely sensitive. I'm very highly sensitive. It's a good thing. It's a compliment. I see sensitivity as an intelligence. And so even if there was annoyance or whatever, that shit just flooded my little girl brain, like my little toddler brain. And my greatest strength, if you take the VIA strengths inventory, you can find your top 5 strengths for free. VIA, values in action, strengths inventory. I'm pretty sure that's assessment, strengths assessment, I think. My greatest strength is to love and be loved. Like, who knew that was a strength to begin with? But that's my greatest strength. Imagine if I'm supposed to be, you know, loving and being loved, and then I don't get to do that as much. And I'm not saying I wasn't loved as a child. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, like, for what I needed, and you know, a lot of it, like, for instance, we moved a lot, and then my parents got divorced, and my mom was a single mom. So there was a lot of things that happened that she had no control over because she was working all the time, and she had to. It couldn't be in none other way. And so I look at it as that shit went down, and you know, that went down for me, and it was hard for me. You know, it was hard for her too. It was hard for my sister. It was hard. It was just hard. It's hard for any kid. But I get to say that it was hard on me, and I get to own that. And so just to be clear, this is never about blaming your parents. If you want to, you can. This is about just acknowledging that whatever shit went down, that's my diagnosis. Shit went down. And you don't have to say what that shit was or whatever, but you can tell that shit went down from the way that you're acting in your life right now. You know, do you have an addiction? Bitch, shit went down. Are you unhappy in your relationships? Are you swept up in drama and toxicity? Bitch, shit went down. And so let's not even waste another minute trying to defend ourselves from not working on our shit. Like, we can just say shit went down, and so now I have to deal with that. Shit going down wasn't my fault. We don't even need to blame anybody else for it. But that still doesn't negate that shit did go down, and that I am living the results of that shit going down. And so what am I gonna do about it? So yeah, this book, like, I really, 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 really recommend it. Like, really recommend it. Even if you can only read like a chapter a year, like, it's just good to see this shit in writing, and you'll be like, oh my God, this resonates. So I hope that was helpful. I love you. Bye.